Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our public celebration of Swami Vivekananda's birthday. Sadly, due to the Omicron issue, we can't stage this event in Vedanta Hall. We are broadcasting, so to say, from the Sarada Tapovan nunnery, and the entire event is via Zoom. We're recording. We'll put it up on our Vedanta Society of New South Wales YouTube channel later. And just to take you through the program, just a moment, get the... So as you see on the screen there, we'll start with Vedic Chanting by the Sri Sarada Nuns. It's followed by what should be a really interesting panel discussion, and I'm very happy that we've had Prema Menon Ruthrun Selvarajan to join us on the panel. And we will just be discussing several issues related to Swami Vivekananda, bridge builder between East and West, past and future. Then we will conclude with a talk by Pravrajika Gayatriprana on Swami Vivekananda's Vedanta for the modern age. Then there'll be some announcements. So thank you again for joining us. And we will now proceed to have some chanting by the Sarada Nuns. I'll just go to full view there.
They are chanting the Narayana Sukta. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us both together. May he nourish us both together. May we both work together with great energy. May our study be vigorous and effective. May we not hate each other. May peace, physical, mental, and spiritual, be upon us forever. Om Sahasra Shirsham Devam Vishwaksham Vishwashambhuvam Vishwam Narayanam Devam Aksharam Paramam Padam Vishwata Paramanityam Vishwam Narayana Gumharim Vishwamevedam Purushastad Vishwamupajivati Patim Vishwasyatmeshwaragum Shashvatagum Shivamarchutam Narayanam Mahatmeyam Vishwatmanam Parayanam. This universe is truly the divine personally. Therefore, it subsists on him, the self-effulgent divine being, who has many heads and many eyes, who is the producer of joy for the universe, who is the master and cause of humanity, whose forms are the various gods, who is imperishable, who is the all-surpassing ruler and savior, who is superior to the world, who is endless and omniform, who is the goal of humanity, who is the destroyer of sin and ignorance, who is the protector of the universe and the ruler of individual souls, who is permanent, supremely auspicious and unchanging, who has embodied himself in man as his support, being the indwelling spirit, who is supremely worthy of being known by the creatures, who is embodied in the universe, and who is the supreme goal. Narayana paro jyotiratma Narayana paraha Narayana param brahma tattvam Narayana paraha Narayana paro dhyata dhyanam Narayana paraha Narayana is a supreme light described in the Upanishads. Narayana is a supreme reality designated as Brahman. Narayana is the highest self. Narayana is the infinite self. Narayana is the most excellent meditator and meditation.
Yacca kinchit jagat sarvam drishyate shruyate piva andarbahishya tat sarvam vyapya narayana stitaha.
Whatsoever there is in this world, known through perception because of their proximity, or known through report because of their distance, all that is pervaded by Narayana within and without. Anantamavyayam
Kavigum samudrendam vishvashambhuvam padmakosha pratikashagum hridayam chapyadhomukam.
One should meditate upon the Supreme, the limitless, unchanging, all-knowing cause of the happiness of the world, dwelling in the sea of one's own heart as the goal of all striving. The place for his meditation is the ether in the heart which is comparable to an inverted lotus bud.
Adho nishtyavitasyanti nabhyamuparitishthati jwalamala kulam bhati vishwasyayatanam mahat.
It should be known that the heart, which is located just at the distance of a finger span below the Adam's apple and above the navel, is the great abode of the universe.
Sandadagum shilabhistulam bhatya kosha sannibam tasyante sushiragum sukshmam tasmin sarvam pratishtitam.
Like the bud of a lotus in an inverted position, hangs the heart, surrounded by arteries. In it, there is a narrow space, or near it, there is a narrow space called Sushumna. In it, everything is supported.
Tasya madhye mahanagmir vishvachir vishvato mukaha Sograbhu vibhajandishtannaharamajara kavihi tirya gurdhamadashyayi rashmayastasya sandataha sandapayati swam dehamapadatalamastakaha tasya madhye vannishika aniyordhva vyavastitaha Nilato yadamadhyastad vidyullekhe vabhasvara Nivara shukavatvanvi pitabhasvatyanupama.
In the middle of that narrow space of the heart, or Sushumna, remains the undecaying, all-knowing, omni-faced great fire, which has flames on every side, which enjoys the food presented before it, which remains assimilating the food consumed, the rays of which spread, scattering themselves vertically and horizontally, and which warms its own body from the insole to the crown. In the center of that fire, which permeates the whole body, there abides a tongue of fire of the color of shining gold, which is the topmost among the subtle, which is dazzling like the flash of the lightning that appears in the middle of a rain-bearing cloud, which is as slender as the awn of a paddy grain, and which serves as a comparison to illustrate subtlety.
Tasya shikhaya madhye paramatma vyavastitaha Sabrahma Sashiva Sahari Sendra Sokshara Paramaswarat.
Paramatman dwells in the middle of that flame. Although he is thus limited, still he is the four-faced creator, Shiva, Vishnu, Indra, the material and efficient cause of the universe, and the supreme self-luminous pure consciousness. Ritam
Satyam Param Brahma Purusham Krishna Pingalam Urdharetam Virupaksham Vishwarupaya Vai Namo Namaha.
Supreme Brahman, the absolute reality, has become an androgynous person in the form of Uma Maheshwara, dark blue and reddish brown in hue, absolutely chaste and possessing uncommon eyes. Salutations to him, who alone is the soul of the universe.
Om Narayanaya Vidmahe Vasudevaya Dhimahi Tanno Vishnu Prachodayat. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sad. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
May we know Narayana, for that may we meditate on Vasudeva, may Vishnu impel us towards it. Om, peace, peace, peace.
So after that beautiful introduction of Vedic chanting with beautiful, profound meanings, we'll be moving to the next item in the program. If you could join me now. You there, Ruthrun?
Hello, Robert Uncle.
Yeah, good.
Yes.
Good.
Yes. Yeah.
Hello there. Yeah, thanks for joining us. So as we've announced, the theme for this panel discussion is Swami Vivekananda, Bridge Builder, East and West, Past and Future. And happily, Prema and Ruthrun have agreed to participate in the panel. And I will just give some brief introductions to the two of them, and then I'll make some introductory comments, and then we'll launch into exploring some points related to this theme. Prema grew up in Singapore, where she had contact with the Ramakrishna Mission Center there before she settled in Australia. She's a talented podcaster, and she's also an operations manager who has worked in various sectors, including media and the not-for-profit sector. Prema runs Samoham Media and works with minority groups to ensure they receive the funds and support they need to help community in need. Ruthrun grew up in Australia under a Western system, as he puts it, but a family upbringing based around Hinduism and Vedantic teachings. He has been brought up to respect both East and West perspectives through the Ramakrishna Sarada Vedanta Society of New South Wales, with which he's had contact since the age of 9, way back in 1992. So just to make some introductory comments for this theme. Early on, in his first visit to the West, two things became clear to Swami Vivekananda. Firstly, when it came to religion, he was bemused, sometimes even appalled, at the Americans' simplistic understanding of religion and their widespread failure to comprehend the full import of Christ's teachings. The Swami contrasted this with the average Indian's understanding of religion, and he would like to tell his Western audiences how even the simplest peasant farmer could engage in a meaningful discussion about religion and spirituality, and quite quite commonly have an outlook that there are many paths to God. Secondly, the Swami was fascinated by the Americans' capacity for organization, for innovation, their scientific achievements, their ability to uplift the living standard of the common man. As we know, there were waves of immigrants from Europe coming into America before Swami came there, and while he was there, seeking a new life in this dynamic country, a new and better life. He contrasted this with the deprived and insular situation in India. And of course, as we know, compounded by exploiting colonizers, which created a demoralized and confused populace. For the Swami, it was clear the East and West had much to offer the other. He wished for a society that combined the best of both worlds, spirituality and science, with a broad and deep outlook on life, coupled with efficiency and initiative. And he spent the rest of his short life tirelessly striving for this. Over 125 years have passed since the Swami diagnosed what ailed and what would heal the very different worlds of East and West, and the treatment required to create healthy, dynamic societies on all sides. The question is, how far has this dream been realized? What would Swami Vivekananda make of the world today? So this morning, we're going to tease out these points and more with Prema and Ruthrun. And I'll just get up the first point here in the PowerPoint presentation, just a moment. So came to my mind that having spent quite a bit of time in Singapore and mindful that Prema has grown up there, I've often wondered, is this little island state something that's approaching the type of society that Swami Vivekananda was aiming for? It's got an Asian background, and yet right up to date with technology. Just a moment. With technology, very, very modern society. So I'm wondering, Prema, what do you think? What's your thoughts on this? Sorry, Prema, let's see, why aren't you unmuted? That's it.
Now?
Oh, that's it, got you now.
Thanks, Robert, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I just want to say, when Robert asked me to be a part of this panel, the first thing I thought of was like, oh God, what am I going to say? Because I have very strong views about Singapore. And as I get older, I also am redefining my own cultural identity, as many people in my age bracket are, due to information that's available to us today and to the shifting of sort of global perceptions. And so, yes, so I'd just like to start with that. I think, every time I have a conversation about Singapore, especially since I've moved here, the first thing people always say is, oh, why did you move? Singapore is fantastic. Everything's so efficient. Everything is great. And then you have great food. And I guess the point I always come back to is having a choice, and having a choice in how you live and having a choice in the things that you do. So in this broad kind of idea of East and West, I think, of course, many would know Singapore was colonized by the British, and a lot of the institutions that still prevail today have been set up by those systems. So in that way, yes, there is organization, there is a certain type of order. And then that's mixed with sort of what people think to be a very forward-thinking Asian culture. And I think that's the job that Singapore does in marketing itself, and it does it really well. However, I think whether that's a true picture of what an ideal society would look like, I have different thoughts. Because I think if we go back to this idea of East meets West, I think the concept was first coined, used to describe, I think, Hong Kong, because Hong Kong had, of course, been colonized, and it was mixed with kind of these Chinese values, and people felt like, yeah, this was a good meeting of two worlds. Over time, this has become to somehow represent just Eastern cultures and almost treating the East and the West as sort of monoliths on their own, which they are not. And I think also perhaps not acknowledging that if you want to build a bridge between two cultures, to some extent, both cultures need to be on equal footing. And I think when Swami Vivekananda talked about the East and the West, this was probably at the height of when the British were colonizing, the West was colonizing parts of the world. So I don't ever think it was an equal partnership. I think, which is why I think perhaps this idea of order being brought from the West and somehow thought, behavior, and feelings being brought from the East. And I think over time, we are now learning that certain cultures had certain ways of doing things that perhaps were good in itself. And so that's where I stand on this, whether I don't know if there can ever sort of be a true union or good union of East and West. I think in doing so, we have to acknowledge sort of the indifferences in certain power structures. And I think, again, I go back to the point because I think a lot of my work is in removing disparities, that I see the effects of all of these disparities. And I think that's what informs my perspective. So I don't know, I hope that adds a bit of color to this discussion, that while East and meets West is an ideal state to get to, there's a lot of hard work that needs to take place in making sure it's a proper, equal sort of intermingling of cultures. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. I see, gosh, having grown up in Australia, it's surprising how much and how quickly a society can change. I guess Singapore, it's got that interesting history where you had a very powerful, dominating figure like Lee Kuan Yew, and he lifted the country out of poverty, really. He modernized it, but then I always think, yeah, it's wonderful what's been achieved in Singapore. I guess still maybe it's got to reach some kind of balance where it's maybe not so tightly organized and controlled. We could loosen up a little bit. Anyway,
yeah. I guess the last point I want to make, perhaps I forgot to make, was I think in Singapore, yes, I think at the height of progress, the Western values were kind of put forward for us to aspire to, even that we should speak English, that we should do this. And a lot of our Asianness, I don't want to group all of us, but just to be efficient with time, that was kind of discouraged. And we wore our Eastern values and Eastern cultures almost as costumes, which we still do till today. So that's one of those things to consider. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Ruthrun, what's you got any comments on this? Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay. Why?
Yep. I'm good now. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm glad sign language works to,
I'm grappling with the security controls here.
You have the power.
Yes.
There's some fantastic points there. So I'd like to speak mostly on the background of a Hindu who's grown up in Australia. So I myself have grown up in Australia since the age of 3, all the way to now. So my values are very much shaped. So I was schooled in Australia under, a Western kind of, knowledge base. And what was very interesting when I was going through schooling in the 90s, when we did religion, it was only 2 choices. So we only had either scripture or you sat in a room and read. So there was not much of a choice of what you could really do in school. But that's changed dramatically. So personally, I actually work for the Department of Education at the moment as a contractor. And if you look at the curriculum of the department right now, it's very mixed. So they do consider all these different faiths, Islamic, Hindu, Buddhism, Jewish, Baha'i, Sikh. They're all very, very big sort of groups which are taught in school. So you're given the option to actually learn about these different religions, which is fantastic. So Australia itself has come a long way, from a stance where you could only be taught either scripture or nothing at all to all these different classes, because they understand that every single person now, they do come from different backgrounds, and part of the education is to encourage your own spiritual kind of knowledge through the means in which you've been taught at home. So it reinforces what you've been taught at home, as well as what you're doing at school. So they actually have volunteers who come in to school and actually teach you each of these different religions, where possible. You even have the choice now of learning ethics as well. So if you don't even have a religious denomination, you can have the option of, given the basics of critical thinking, is something that you're put into a situation where you're given the choice to kind of decide, is that right or is that wrong? So there's a good, healthy discussion around, for young people to not just accept everything as it is, but to kind of think about it and consider it. And this is kind of what Swamiji actually brought along with him. He wasn't just preaching about, the dogmatic religions where you have to just follow. He often said that you have to critically think about everything that you were given. So for me, I believe it's come a long way in terms of the education system. Also, even in the workplace, mindfulness is a big thing. So in the department, they have full articles and web pages of how to be mindful, because it's a technique to relieve stress, to focus your thoughts. They've done numerous studies to make it possible in the department, because to bring it into something like a government organization, it's not that simple. It takes a lot of study. It takes a lot of research. So the fact that it is part of a government curriculum to kind of help relieve stress, it's amazing, because mindfulness is just one part of yoga, which it's prevalent all the way through the US and Australia, and now it's like part of the actual curriculum to kind of help people. So it's amazing how quickly, and it's happened in a very short period of time, which is incredible. So I think Swamiji would be quite amazed at how something which was never mainstream, which was only accessed through Indian culture, and it's now available in all the way in Australia in your education and in your curriculum. So he would be, I think, quite impressed at the moment. Obviously, there's still a lot to be done, but I think he'll be quite amazed. Yes.
That's going to lead in nicely to the next point we're going to explore. But while you were talking there, Ruthrun, I remember, just came to mind, the last job I had before I started working full-time with Mataji and the Society. I was working with AGC, which was like the financial side of Westpac. They were in cahoots with Westpac. And when I went for the interview, I realized it was a psychologist who was doing the interviews for the applicants for the job. And this is way back in 1981. And I had a brainwave, because to try and impress her, and of course you've got to sell yourself, why they should employ me. So I told her, I do meditation and yoga, and it keeps me healthy and gives me a positive outlook. Now, this is back in 1981, mind you. So I
think they would have thought you were a quack or something at that time.
Well, yeah, but no, she was young, so I somehow sensed she was a bit sort of tuned in.
Yeah.
And then next thing I know, she's calling in the manager. He has a look at me, goes out of the room, and that's it. I've got it. I've got the job. So I find that interesting, isn't it? That I blatantly exploited my interest in meditation and yoga to help me get a job.
Yeah, and I think if you gave that response to an interviewer now, it would be widely accepted. It wouldn't be an issue.
Well, they might ask you, okay, what kind of meditation do you do?
Exactly. Yeah, they'll go even deeper. So there's an overall understanding now that mindfulness is a thing. Everybody knows about it. It's now they're probably now exploring more aspects of yoga and other facets which can sort of help people. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yes, so like I say, that's going to be a good lead in to the next point to explore here. I'll just put that up on the screen for a moment. As meditation and yoga go mainstream, how to maintain depth and sanctity. And so having played a leading role in introducing meditation and, well, at least yoga philosophy, not so much the postures, to the West, we could imagine Vivekananda would be heartened by how pervasive, how mainstream they are in the West today. But then by being so mainstream, have they lost some of their value, their sanctity? That is an issue that so many people worry about. So welcome your thoughts on this. That is well, perhaps a happy challenge to have, that they are so prevalent. Then it's more an issue of maintaining the standard. Welcome your comments on this.
I'll go first, I guess.
Yeah.
I think I'm a big believer in sometimes not being such rigid gatekeepers, because people need an entry point. So be it food, be it something like yoga, one way to start building those bridges is for people to gain a easy entry point. And if at this point, if yoga is that entry point, I think that's probably one that is great, because perhaps the true kind of practitioners of yoga will still kind of be in their lane, and the type that's being marketed to a mass market and commodified is bringing in a very different crowd that perhaps otherwise would never really have any chance to interface with our culture or with the broader Eastern culture. So that's where I stand, because I think sometimes when you've lived in a certain sort of a box or a boundary, to try new things can be incredibly scary. And I say this from a migrant experience coming here. How do you gain entry into spaces? And I think this is one of those low-hanging fruits that people can access and come into. Yeah.
Yeah, they're good kind of halfway house to going in deeper.
Yeah.
If they wish to. Of course, not everybody wants to,
Yeah.
but they're still going to get some benefit, of course. Ruthrun, yeah. Oh, how come that's happened? Just a moment, I've got to find. Right.
Great, thank you. Yep. Yeah, I completely agree with what Prema said. Social media, the technology, it allows anybody and everybody to join the discussion. You have access to all this information, you can give your point of view, but it pretty much gives you, there was an interesting quote I read, every single person becomes a journalist. So, you could put out information which doesn't have any credibility. It could be completely false. It could be completely correct. But the person who reads it, they have access to everything now. It's a matter of kind of sifting through this huge wave of information and kind of figuring out what is true, what makes sense to you, what actually relates to you, and what you can actually use in your everyday life. I'll just read a quote which I got from Mataji. It says they get everything from the internet. I call it Google Guru. From Google Guru, we get a lot of information, but it's not knowledge, it is information. Knowledge is that which will be useful to you to live a life more effective and meaningful. So it's a problem which affects everybody, and I have this problem constantly. You scroll through waves and waves of information, and you don't really focus on something and figure out whether it's true, you get a bit lazy to kind of discover what it means to you. So a lot of this, I believe it's to do with focus, trying to figure out what is important to you, think deeply about it, consider it, and actually use it in your own lives. So yeah, I feel social media has given you a lot of that access to that information, but a lot of us probably don't delve very deeply into it, which I feel is an important part of making that information relevant and making it useful. There was a good, also nice quote which Swami Vivekananda said. So he said, take up one idea, make that idea your life, think of it, dream of it, live on that idea. Let the brain, muscles, nerves, every part of your body be full of that idea, and leave every other idea alone. This is the way to success. So he was really, it's interesting. It was a quote he said many, more than 100 years ago, but it's very relevant to today, because you don't have that focus these days. A lot of it, you're bombarded with all this information. You really have to distill it down to something that's really relevant to yourself.
Yeah, well, it's so important to, never more important to be able to think for yourself. Because yes, we have no problem now. There's information overload. So yeah, quite a challenge to sift through that. I know when I first started exploring meditation and yoga, I went to many different groups, and I quickly formulated some guidelines for myself. One was, if any group claimed some sort of exclusivity, that they were the chosen ones, I was heading for the door. Other one, gimmicks. They've suddenly found some revolutionary new way to meditate that's going to, you'll reach enlightenment quicker. Again, I was up heading for the door.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of the things they say is new and fashionable. It's just to encourage people, but it's probably something which people have been saying for a long time. Many,
well-trodden path.
Yeah, well-trodden path. And this thing of discovering it is probably not really something that's people use it as a buzzword, but it's happened before. So
well, I mean, it's pretty important that you do that, because some people have really suffered. They've got involved with a particular group and they've got some benefit, but then over time it can really be quite harmful in some cases, has been.
Yeah, and social media is not, it's not a biased sort of medium. It is run by companies, large companies. It's run by people to sell products, so there's always something in it normally in social media. It doesn't run for free.
Yeah, we'll be talking a bit more about social media. That's the last point. We'll go a bit more deeply into its impact, because it is such a big thing now. And just touching on this prevalence of yoga and meditation, I've been dipping into a book by American journalist Philip Goldberg, who's a devotee of sorts of Vedanta. And he's written a book called American Veda, and he's done a lot of research into the impact of Vedanta and yoga on America over the last many decades. He's got a whole chapter on Swami Vivekananda in the book. But he was pointing out yoga in the US is now a $16 billion a year industry. You use the word industry as a kind of unfortunate term, but this book was written some years ago. And even at that time, he was saying 6.9% of the American population could be described as yoga practitioners. So you do wonder, Swami Vivekananda would really be, his eyes would be wide, wouldn't it? You would think, with those sort of statistics. Mm-hmm. And on a rather quirky and I think appalling note, there was even a proposal that yoga become an Olympic sport. But he's saying, and as Prema was touching on, most yoga teachers happily will bring in some ideas draw on some ideas of the philosophical background of yoga. So someone coming along for a yoga workout, it's a nice way for them to get some inkling. Where does this come from? What's lying behind? What's the deeper aspect of that? And then just to make one more little comment, Philip, again from Philip Goldberg, he's highlighting, I think you've all heard of Eckhart Tolle, for example, and his book, The Power of Now. Now, of course, he's drawing on Vedanta and Buddhism, although he's not overtly quoting it, but he's incorporated the ideas and made it more relatable, I guess you could say, to people who don't know anything about Eastern philosophy. So I think, it's a good service he's providing that way. So we better move on. We've got two more points here to cover. So the next one, there's this trend of swinging away from religiosity and then towards spirituality. And I'll just expand a bit on that. I'll get to share. Because of course, Vivekananda, he critiqued the West's static piety. And I can remember in my early days going to church on Sunday morning. Many times it was more about making sure your family is as socially acceptable in the community as possible. That if you're seen at church, then it's implied you're a good, upstanding family. And of course, how it didn't, the actual religious or spiritual side of it, in many cases, wasn't going in very deep at all. It was more to be seen to be doing the right thing. And then, of course, the West has had the unfortunate habit of being very suspicious of mystics, and Christianity has thrown up numerous mystics over the centuries, very, very deep. When you read their teachings, you can tell they've had the deepest experiences, and yet many times they were victimized by the authorities. So in the West today, we're well aware that there's a swing away from the kind of institutionalized religion and more an embracing of spirituality, of having experience, not just being simply pious, and to want to be able to challenge religious dogma. So I'm wondering, both of you, you're the younger generation, what are you picking up amongst your friends and workmates and in your own lives? How has your view of religion and spirituality changed over the years? Where are we at with the younger generation with this? Prema?
Yeah, I could go first.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start with kind of my own introduction. I brought up in a, I think, culturally Hindu family, but I think I was introduced to Ramakrishna Mission by my father, who is a devotee. And I think back then, I think now on hindsight, my father was quite smart. Like he brought us there, and we were kind of exposed to very early on to stories, to culture that perhaps wasn't accessible in mainstream schools, because for those of you who may not know, Singapore is predominantly a Chinese country. So either Christians, a majority Christian population, and then I think followed by Buddhism. So this was a great avenue for us. And it was also a way for me to spend time with my father on the weekends and also get some really good biscuits from the Swamijis and stuff. So as a child, you go for different motivation. And I think I reconnected with the religion or with the philosophy when I moved here to Australia, because I think I started coming back to spirituality as a way to really understand what it means to be human. I think when I came here, I realized that the world was in such strife and there was so much happening that perhaps I had taken for granted before, having lived in a bubble. And what does it mean to be human, to be living amongst all of this suffering, and perhaps feeling like you cannot impact, you cannot help? Then why are you here? So that's kind of why I've kind of come back to this, and I use my connection with the spirituality to really understand difficulty, understand my own difficulty. So if I go in the broader kind of context, since I've come here, everybody that I've gotten to know, and I meet a variety of different people who work in the community sector, people who work in the private sector. And I think especially in the past 2 years, a lot of people are asking themselves this question, like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human when I know that there's suffering in this country, that people are living differently from me? And a lot of people do reference trying to understand the bigger picture. So I think people are spiritual but not religious. People are embracing something to believe in and something to guide them that perhaps they may not be able to rationalize, but gives them a deep comfort. And I think that's what spirituality is becoming, a way of understanding that, a way of making sense of chaos, but trying to be present amongst that chaos. And I see a lot of people seeking out sort of these spiritual philosophies of Ruthrun said, mindfulness, but also seeking out things like understanding that perhaps we've had past lives and that a lot of what we are dealing with now comes from our history. And I see this across different cultures. It's not only within perhaps an Indian culture or within an Asian culture. I have some friends who are multi-generational white Anglo-Saxon Australians who also are kind of turning to that same belief. And it's quite comforting to know, because suddenly it feels like there are more of us speaking a similar type of language. And I think in some ways, because the world is so much smaller and there's so much more that we are aware of going on, we are all trying to maybe make sense of this world around the same time.
Yeah, that's very heartening. Yeah, thanks, Prema.
Yeah.
Ruthrun, what?
Yeah, I believe I was always my father's probably listening to this now, but he always told us lots of stories from Hindu
Yes.
mythology. I mean, we thought of them as just stories, but they all came from a place, and they came from scriptures. They came from very old texts, and you know, I look back now, and I was really appreciative that my father actually told me those stories. It was all part of my culture, but it was a way for me to access spirituality and these very deep lessons through these stories. Because how do you really tell a child, you know, it's time to be spiritual? You know, spirituality, it's not easy to convey to a child. And for me, it was very easy for me to access it, because throughout my life I was practicing these things without myself even knowing it, because my family, my parents, they helped me access it in a way which I understood. And that's how Swamiji actually probably did it. He was a very young, vibrant man. He came to the West, and he made all these very deep and meaningful lessons that he picked up from India accessible to the West. He could convey it to people. People could understand it, and that's how I feel about religion. It's a means to give you access to all these lessons, these deep and spiritual, meaningful lessons. And to a certain point, I think when you get older, you have to look beyond just the stories and try to find more of the meaning in each of those teachings. But I feel the simple idea of dropping religions altogether and people swinging away from religions is probably not the best direction. You should use it as a means to find a way to spirituality. And for me, I teach my children, you know, the same sort of scriptures that I learned, because it's the best way for me to make it interesting for them. You know, all these wars and action and all these interesting stories they love, and they do like me to tell it to them, and that's sort of how I see my children's future going forward. You know, I'd like to tell them these things. Whether they do it or not is up to them, but I prefer them to kind of keep this sort of this religion kind of going, but in a way that they can get access to spirituality in the end.
Yeah, look, I remember growing up at school sometimes, like in, say, in primary school, the teacher would tell us parables, stories from the Bible. And I found that they made a mark, they went in quite deep. I guess where it fell down was that there wasn't this follow-up or this emphasis on, so much emphasis on transformation.
Mm.
I think that's what's starting to happen now, that everybody's saying, I'll give all of this time, but I want to see some change in myself. I want to improve. I want to get some, well, it's almost like being pragmatic about it. If I'm going to put some time and effort into this, then I want to get some tangible benefit from it. So I gather that's what's happening now, that not being static about it anymore. And that's a very good thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And well, interestingly, again, I'm drawing on Philip Goldberg's book. He's realizing that they do these surveys of people who are religiously minded or involved in religious organizations. And it's quite interesting how they're all starting to come around to a more Vedantic outlook without maybe knowing anything about Vedanta or being aware of Vedanta. So, for example, 3/4 surveyed preferred to approach spirituality in a more personal and individual way, rather than via organized religion and doctrine. So I think that's a very Vedantic concept, that we are each individual. We can draw on many sources, but in the end, we each have our, well, I think as Swami Vivekananda used to say, each of us have our own religion in the end. We create for ourselves. Then there's a greater emphasis on seeking a personal relationship with God, more of a direct experience. So just as we've been, again, Vedanta, Vivekananda emphasized that you don't just believe, you've got to get some experience. This has to be real for you. So there's an increasing number of people, 39%, seeking a personal relationship with God. Then, contrary to what we may think, exclusivism is on the decline and pluralism is on the rise. And again, he's referring to America. I think what happens with America, for example, we tend to hear more about the fundamentalist groups, but actually he's highlighting here, they're a minority. Their outlook is a minority. That's where it's a very narrow outlook. 70% are now agreeing that there are many paths to eternal life. And even belief in scriptures as the literal word of God is on the decline. And most believe that God is everywhere and in everything, rather than some, of course, old man in the sky, the anthropomorphic deity, to use the technical term. So he's highlighting, he's saying, without knowing it, masses of people in America, they're gradually coming to have a more Vedantic outlook on religion and spirituality. So quite interesting. So we'll go to the last point now. And this is the really big one, the social media. We've already been touching on that as we go along here. Bridge builder or a time-wasting distraction. And I don't know, I mean, sometimes when you're out and about, I feel like I'm in the middle of some science fiction story sometimes, because everybody's there out on the streets. They're all looking at their phones. And I sometimes make up a story out of it. There's some signal will come through the phone and they'll all become zombies, if I'm being very unkind about it. But of course, I think what it reminds me of is when with the rise of the internal combustion engine, the age of motor vehicles, and how there was tremendous concern about this invention and the impact it was going to have on society. And in the very early days of the motor vehicle, in some places, the cars were not allowed to go beyond a certain speed limit, and someone would be walking along in front of the car with a red flag to warn people the car is coming. And that was the sort of the resistance to the rise of this new invention. Now, of course, see where we are, that it's a mixed experience, the motor vehicle. And we're well familiar with all the pros and cons. So I'm wondering whether this is how we view social media. It's a mixture, but it's not going to go away like the motor car isn't. And it's a matter of adapting So I'll appreciate your, yes, Prema, what do you think about this?
So could you, so the question is around what I feel social media today represents, or the status, and correct? Yeah.
So,
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
oh, well, look, I guess I should have delved into my point that I prepared here, that I guess in particular, it's means of connecting humanity, and then its ability to bring people together with very specialized interests. So we could view it in that way as a very valuable bridge builder. But then on the other hand, it's such a powerful tool where maybe we are still at a stage where we are learning how to use it properly and responsibly, and for it not to have a negative impact on our lives. So just are we still in this learning process with it?
I think first, with the kind of the introduction of social media, I just want to reference a point earlier you made where you said that, when we think of America, we hear more about the fundamentalists, and we don't actually understand perhaps that pluralism is growing. And I just would like everyone to reflect on this point. It's because the people who are in power, who build these institutions that give out information, they generally look like one type of group. And so pluralism really thrives in areas like social media. I think social media has given a voice to so many Black, Indigenous, people of color, people from minority communities. I personally have learned so much more about the issues in different countries because of the ability to connect. Of course, too, also there's a degree of having to verify, but the ability to connect to different types of writing, different types of literature. And so the social media for a long time has been a space that's perhaps not been conquered, where there's a sense of democracy in terms of being able to put your thought out there. And I think that is invaluable. That is not something we've had, because voices that prevail on these platforms, the minority voices, are voices that were traditionally excluded out of the mainstream. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing about, have we learned to use it properly? Unfortunately, I think in social media, we have become the product, because if anything is ever free, you are the product. So nothing's ever free. And I think that is a problem of the big regulators and the big tech companies that run the social media platform. So unfortunately, though, we can only play in the playpen that we've been given. And I think there comes a certain level of responsibility and regulation that needs to happen. But I think it's one of those things, right? You can't really define what's good enough or what's too rigid. And it's something, I guess, as generations grow, we will learn how to figure out as we go. Because I remember when I first, so my generation in my teenhood, I got a pager, so a beeper, right? And this gave me access to my friends that perhaps my mother and my father never understood, or I had like a mobile phone. And then there was all these things about, like, oh, should people be texting each other? Should people be calling? I think every generation has that one device that splits opinion. So with everything, I think there's a level of conversation and that can be brought out that is really beneficial to society for us to grow, and in essence to build those bridges, because if not, we can't build those bridges. And also for us to really learn from the past so that we can work towards kind of really repairing a lot of relations and reconciling for the future. So that's how I sit with that.
Yeah, look, I think it's just a classic example of change, that never can humanity ever settle on a particular way of doing things. There's always been change throughout history, and never so much and so fast as now. That's a given.
It's changing so quickly. We only have had social media within 20 years. And just the other day, my son got his first mobile phone, and I'm panicking what I don't know, my wife Janaki, she's probably doing the same thing. We're thinking, what do we give him access to? You know, we haven't thought about it because we think we're adults and we can access everything. But for a child, we're thinking, you know, if he had access to everything that we had, it will cause him all sorts of dramas and problems. So we're really on our training wheels when it comes to social media, and it's changing so quickly. I actually I do work in the cloud space, so everything's in the cloud now. And, you know, we've done work where it's so convenient, we put all our computers that we'd have in a building into the cloud. And just as easily as you can create a machine in the cloud within seconds, you can also delete machines quite easily in seconds. So this power of convenience, it poses a lot of problems. You know, I've deleted whole 10 machines which I didn't mean to delete off the cloud without myself knowing, and it was just because I had the convenience of doing it. I could do it. You know, we have a lot of power in our hands, and until we kind of learn, you know, how to use it properly,
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're at. We still don't know how to use it properly.
It's like it's like we have the power of gods, and yet we're not.
Yeah, and the thing is, we keep on getting new things. You know, we're in social media. I think there's this new thing Facebook is doing called the metaverse, where your whole you can see everybody as if they're virtual people, and who knows what this will bring. It's a completely new territory to the experience. So.
I suppose Vivekananda, you wonder how he would have viewed it, and I imagine probably the thing he'd be really down on is that it can create a lot of distraction and restlessness, and I imagine maybe two aspects of it that he'd be really lecturing about. But then I'm sure on the other hand, he'd see the potential for it to connect people. You know,
Yeah,
the power to do tremendous things, and it has done. I'm sure he would have really valued that. So yeah, like everything, it's a mixed blessing.
Exactly.
You know, nothing's simple.
Yeah.
So when it comes to these things, so I think we'll need to wind up here with the panel discussion. And thank you very much, Prema and Ruthrun, for agreeing to participate, and really value your well-considered input to the discussion. And we will now move on to the next item in the program. So I will just organize things here. So we'll be having the talk now by Pravrajika Gayatriprana on a similar sort of theme, Swami Vivekananda's Vedanta for the Modern Age.
Namashri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Sure Sachit Sukhaswarupaya Swamine Tapaharini. Salutations to that King of Renouncers, controller of passions, the sage Vivekananda, who is Satchidananda, existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute itself, the spiritual preceptor and the remover of distress. Vedanta is the philosophy of Hinduism. It's based on the teachings of the Upanishads. The Upanishads speak about the presence of an unchanging divine reality behind the ever-changing universe. This reality, called Atman or Brahman, which is pure consciousness, is the real essence of the person. The Upanishadic sages realized that reality present within themselves as well as in all others, men, women, animate and inanimate objects. The first Upanishads starts with the statement, Isha Vasimidam Sarvam. Whatever is, everything is pervaded by the Lord. Thus, the Upanishad present God as a divine reality present in everything in this universe, not as an extra cosmic God, as just now Robert mentioned, is an old man sitting up in the clouds. But that Advaitic truth was known only for a select few, and even fewer people put those truths into practice. For the ordinary person, Vedanta means Advaita, which says the ultimate reality, Brahman, is non-dual, one without a second, without any qualities or distinctions. We cannot even say what it is. We can only say what it is not. They say in Sanskrit, neti, neti, not this, not this. That's all we can say. Brahman is not this, Brahman is not this, but what it is, we cannot say. And Shankaracharya, the great exponent of Advaita, made the great statement, Brahma Satyam Jagan Midhya, Jivo Brahmaiva Napara. Brahman alone is real. The world is illusory. Individual self and supreme self are inseparable. The world, Brahman alone is real. The world, as we see and experience, is not real, is illusory. This explanation of this great teaching by less evolved people has led to the claim by many that Vedanta is world denying. It is not practical. And it remained with this great teachings of Vedanta remained with the scholars as a mere intellectual exercise for a very long time. As Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Kale neha mahata yogo nashta. Due to long lapse of time, the teaching is lost. And then when that happens, another teacher comes up and expounds the same great truths in a different language suited to the time. Thus, we see in modern times, Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda expounding the great Vedantic truths of divine reality present everywhere and in everything. According as Vedanta says, everyone is divine and Brahman is everywhere, then we should lead our lives in such a way that we realize the oneness of humanity. In the words of Swami Vivekananda, this wonderful idea of the sameness and omnipresence of the Supreme Soul has to be preached for the amelioration and elevation of the human race, here as well as elsewhere. He was speaking in India at that time. Young Narendra learned all this sitting at the feet of his Guru, Sri Ramakrishna. From his own Advaitic realization, Sri Ramakrishna came to feel the presence of the divine consciousness everywhere and in everything. He used to say, can you see God only with your eyes closed? Can't you see him with your eyes open? Shankaracharya preached or explained the way to realize Brahman as not this, negating the world and negating everything. Brahman is not the mind, Brahman is not the intellect, the 24 cosmic principles, negate everything and then reach. So according to, that's why Shankaracharya said, the world is unreal. But Sri Ramakrishna says, once you realize Brahman by negating everything in the universe, you look and find that everything is Brahman. He calls the first negating and realizing Brahman as jnana, and then realizing that everything is nothing but Brahman as vijnana. He gives a very simple example. Sri Ramakrishna's examples and teachings sounds very simple. He says, look at it, take the example of the steps leading to the roof. As you climb the steps one by one, you negate the step. This is not the roof, this is not the roof. And you leave the steps behind and climb up and reach the roof. But once you reach the roof, you realize that the steps and the roof are made of the same material. Brick, mortar, concrete, everything, the same. So when you realize Brahman, after negating the universe, you realize Brahman and then see that there is nothing but Brahman. The whole universe is Brahman. So according to Sri Ramakrishna, the second part of Shankaracharya's teaching, Jagan Mithya, the world is unreal, is not there. The world is real because it is nothing but Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna spoke this way from his personal experience. After realizing this Advaitic truth, he had in his daily life, he was experiencing that. Just to mention two examples, one day in the temple garden, somebody was walking along the lawn on the grass. And Sri Ramakrishna felt as though someone is trampling on his chest because he was feeling the same consciousness present even in a blade of grass. Another time, in the Ganga, two boatmen were fighting and they exchanged blows. And the mark of those blows was found on Sri Ramakrishna's body. This is living illustration of this Upanishadic dictum, Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, everything is Brahman. And this is the new Vedanta that Swami Vivekananda learned from Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna recognized that Advaita as the path for Narendra and tried to train his mind in that way, in that direction. Narendra, when he came to Sri Ramakrishna, was a follower of Brahma Samaj, who believed in the supreme reality or formless aspect of God, formless but with attributes. So Narendra could not accept the path of Advaita, which taught that everything is all-pervading reality. He thought it is blasphemy to think everything as Brahman. Though he rebelled against it, and he even said those sages who said everything is Brahman must have lost their head. He used to make fun and rebelled against those thoughts. Sri Ramakrishna still continued to talk to him about Advaita Vedanta. One day, after Sri Ramakrishna talked to him for a long time about Advaita, Narendra got up from the room, went outside, and started joking with Hasra, another devotee who was sitting there. He said, how can this be? This jug is God, this cup is God, we are also God. Nothing can be more preposterous. And they started laughing. Hearing them laughing, Sri Ramakrishna came out of his room in a semi-conscious state and asked, what are you talking, laughing? And touched Narendra. And that had a revolutionary effect on the mind of Narendra. He says, the magic touch of the master brought about a wonderful change over my mind. I was astounded to find that really there was nothing in the universe but God. So he went home. He didn't say anything. He went home and his mother was serving food. He found food was Brahman, pure consciousness. His mother is pure consciousness. Then he was walking along the road. He see carriages coming. Everything is pure consciousness. He didn't feel to move out of the way out in the path of the carriage. Then after a few days, when the intensity became less, Swamiji later, when describing, he says, the world began to appear to me as a dream. And while walking on the Cornwallis Square, there was railings, iron railings. He went and hit his head there to see whether they really exist or is it a dream. And Swamiji continues, when I became normal again, I realized that I must have had a glimpse of the Advaita state. Then it struck me that the words of the scriptures were not false. Only after personal experience, he believed. That's what Sri Ramakrishna wanted. And that's what the scientific attitude. Prove it to be true to yourself and then believe. Then it struck me that the words of the scriptures were not false. Thenceforth, I could not deny the conclusions of Advaita philosophy. So later, when speaking about this Advaita, Swamiji says, the truth of Vedanta, the truths that Vedanta teaches is deification of the world. He says, deify the world, it's God alone. In life and in death, in happiness and in misery, the Lord is equally present. The whole world is full of the Lord. Open your eyes and see him. This is what Vedanta teaches. You don't have to go away from the world. Be in the world, but see the Lord present everywhere. Young Narendra was very keen in acquiring knowledge in philosophy, history, arts and science, both Eastern and Western. So he studied the Western philosophers like Herbert Spencer, John Stuart Mill, Kant, Schopenhauer, Comte, and others. But these intellectual exercises of these philosophers did not satisfy his deep yearning for direct experience of the reality. His idea was, if there is a God, I must realize him. So he immersed himself into spiritual practices under the guidance of Sri Ramakrishna. One day, he expressed his desire to Sri Ramakrishna to remain absorbed in samadhi continuously for 3-4 days. He said, I would like to remain immersed in samadhi just to come out to normal consciousness once in a while, to eat a little food, to keep the body going. But instead of congratulating and endorsing his desire, Sri Ramakrishna chided him. He said, you are a small-minded person. There is a state even higher than that. All that exists art thou. It's you who sing that song. It's one of the Narendra's favorite songs. All that exists art thou. It's you who sing that song. You will attain a state higher than samadhi. Narendra didn't know that there's a state higher than samadhi. Now Sri Ramakrishna is telling him, you will attain a state higher than samadhi. According to Sri Ramakrishna, to see Brahman everywhere and serve all in that spirit is a state higher than samadhi. Samadhi is a state where you reach your own salvation, for your own salvation. But a state higher than samadhi, you see Brahman, the presence of that supreme reality everywhere, and serve all in that knowledge. Narendra learned from Sri Ramakrishna how to put into practice this teaching of the omnipresence of Brahman. One day at Dakshineshwar, Sri Ramakrishna was talking with the devotees about the Vaishnava religion, the doctrines of the followers of Vaishnavism. It's mainly the three: the relish for the name of God, that is, repeat, love for the name of God. Then second one, compassion for living creatures. And third, service of the devotees of God. These are the three cardinal principles of Vaishnavism: relish for name of God, compassion for living beings, and service of the devotees of God. As he was uttering the word compassion for living all creatures, Sri Ramakrishna went into Samadhi. After a few moments, in a semi-conscious state, he started saying, compassion for creatures. You fool, who are you to show compassion? Not compassion for others, but rather service of man, recognizing him to be the veritable manifestation of God. Among all the devotees and disciples who heard this utterance of the Master, only Narendra could fathom the deep meaning. Coming out of the room, after some time, he told his other brother disciples, what a wonderful light I have discovered in those words of the Master. How beautifully he has reconciled the ideal of bhakti with the knowledge of Vedanta, generally interpreted as dry, austere, and incompatible with human sentiments. That's an ordinary idea of people have about Vedanta, with Advaita Vedanta, as dry, austere, without any human sentiments. What a grand, natural, and sweet synthesis. From those words of wisdom that the Master uttered, I have understood that the ideal of Vedanta, lived by the recluse outside the pale of society, can be practiced even at home and applied to all aspects of daily life. Then he made this almost a prediction. If it be the will of God, the day will soon come when I shall proclaim this grand truth to the world at large. I shall make it the common property of all, the wise and the fool, the rich and the poor, the Brahmin and the Pariah. Often it is said that Swami Vivekananda is the commentary on Sri Ramakrishna and his life. Sri Ramakrishna's words and teachings seem very simple, straightforward, but we need an explanation and elaboration to get some glimpse of the true import of those sayings. Just like the Upanishadic teachings, we need the commentaries to understand what it means. Once, Swamiji himself told a devotee, first try to understand me before you try to understand the Master. So to understand what Sri Ramakrishna meant when he said the simple words, not compassion but service of man, we need Swamiji Vivekananda's explanation. So Swamiji continued with that. Those words of the Master throw an altogether new light upon the path of devotion. Real devotion is far off until the aspirant realizes the immanence of God. Those following the path of work and yoga are similarly benefited by these words of the Master. But whether you are following bhakti, devotion, knowledge, jnana, or action, karma, or meditation, yoga, Sri Ramakrishna's teachings will benefit them all. Swamiji believed, he wanted to preach this Advaitic truth to the whole world because he believed that its practical application would help solve many of the problems that people face. So in a letter he wrote, my ideal indeed can be put into a few words, and that is to preach unto mankind their divinity and how to make it manifest in every moment of life. We can see that he, in his address at the Parliament of Religions, he was addressing the audience as children of immortal bliss. Children of immortal bliss. And then he adds, children of immortal bliss, divinities on earth, sinners, as though it was a big shock for this audience to hear that, who are brought up hearing all the time that they are sinners, they are born into sin. For them to hear that you are children of immortal bliss, you are divinities on earth, it was like a blast of fresh air. Whatever Swamiji is stating or preaching is just the teaching of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna said again and again that the same reality is the nameless, formless Brahman for the Jnani, the follower of the path of knowledge, Atman, the pure self for the yogi, Bhagavan, God with form for the bhakta, devotee. And again, God with form is as true as God without form. These ideas of Sri Ramakrishna, that all the different yogas lead to the same goal, that none is superior to other, Swamiji proclaimed both in the East and in the West. He started his book on Raj Yoga with these words: each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. Do this either by work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all of these, and be free. This is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas or rituals or books or temples or forms are but secondary detail. So according to Swamiji, religion is a manifestation of divinity already within man. Divinity is there. It's potential. Just manifest it. That is religion, not religion as we usually understand, which is a comprising of just some rituals and practices without understanding what it means. This idea of religion can resonate with modern people who, just as we just heard in the discussion, shy away from identifying with any organized religion, but rather like to label themselves as spiritual. In his lectures in the West and as well as in India, Vivekananda came back again and again to this same theme: realize your innate divinity, divine nature, and be free. Express the larger self by giving up this little tiny ego. This harmony of the four yogas is the contribution of Swamiji. He left to the posterity in the form of the emblem he designed for the Ramakrishna order. Now here we can see the emblem for the Ramakrishna Mutt and the emblem for Sri Sarada Mutt. If you at first glance, they may look same, but it cannot be same because we are two separate independent organizations. So you can see there are differences. Those who look carefully can spot the differences. I'm not going to put a test to you to spot the differences, but you can try. The emblem is a symbol of Swami Vivekananda's message of harmony and synthesis. In his own words, the wavy waters in the picture are symbolic of karma, that's action. The lotus of bhakti, devotion. The rising sun of jnana, knowledge. The encircling serpent is indicative of yoga and the awakened kundalini. And the swan in the picture stands for the Paramatma, the Supreme Soul. Therefore, the ideal of the picture is that the union of karma, jnana, bhakti, and yoga, the vision of the Paramatman is obtained. If you follow, that's why in the earlier quotation he said, Be free. Do it either by work or worship or psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all. Use all. Because these four yogas are not watertight compartments. They are, human beings are not, we can say is only active, only a worker, or only a devotee, or only a meditator. We are a combination of all the four. So that is the emblem Swamiji has left for us. He wanted a harmonious development of head and heart. So Swamiji used to say, I want the head of Shankara and the heart of Buddha. That was his ideal. And this idea of the presence of the divine in all, he put into practical application by giving the motto of the Ramakrishna order, Atmano Mokshartham Jagat Hitayeja, for one's own salvation and for the welfare of the world. Here he has elevated work to the level of worship. Worship is not just in the temple or the church. Worship, serve the people as seeing them as the Lord. So what is worship? As he used to say, Shivajnane Jiva Seva. In his famous lecture in Rameswaram temple, when he came back to India from the West in 1897, he landed in Colombo in Sri Lanka, and from there came and the mainland. And there was a big reception accorded to him in the Rameswaram temple. And it's one of his famous saying that he who is Shiva only in the idol, his worship is secondary, inferior. Shiva is more pleased with him who serves the poor, the downtrodden, seeing the presence of the Lord in them. Another truth that Narendra learned from Sri Ramakrishna is that the three schools of Vedanta, Advaita, Vishishtadvaita, and Dvaita, are but different descriptions of the same reality from different points of view. We may wonder why there should be different points of view, because people are in different levels of evolution on the spiritual level. When we are in different stages, we see the reality in different aspects. One example Swamiji gives is, suppose you are traveling from Earth towards the sun, and you take photograph of the sun. And in different stages of your journey, each picture will be different from the other, but they are all pictures of the sun only. In the same way, Dvaita, dualism, Vishishtadvaita, qualified monism, and Advaita, non-dualism, are all aspects of the same reality, looking at the same reality from different standpoints. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that for the dualist, God is separate, the individual is separate. For the qualified Vishishtadvaita, qualified non-dualist, he looks upon himself as part of the divine, as just like a spark of and fire. Whereas the Advaita devotee or follower, God is everything. There is no difference between myself and the supreme reality. Aham Brahmasmi, I am that Brahman. That realization comes. To give this, Sri Ramakrishna gives a very nice example. It seems Sri Rama once asked the great devotee Hanuman, how do you look upon me? And Hanuman replied, when I look upon me as one with a body, as a being, a person with a body, conscious of the physical body, I look upon myself as the servant and yourself as the master. When I see myself as the individual self, then I am part of you. And when I realize that I am the Brahman, then there is I and you are one. Swamiji was explaining these things both in the East and the West. When he came back to India in 1897, he stayed in Madras, or the present Chennai, in a big house called Ice House. Or at that time it's known as Castle Kernan. And there used to be meetings every afternoon where people would come and ask. Question and answer sessions used to be. In one of those sessions, one day, a scholar asked the question, if you say that these three schools are stages, one leading to the other, if it is so, if that is true, why is it that all these great teachers that we had all this time didn't proclaim that? The Sister Nivedita in her book, The Master as I Saw Him, writes, it was customary to give answers to those questions first in English and then in Sanskrit, for the benefit of such scholars present as knew no modern language. Because there are many scholars who didn't know English, they knew only their language, their mother tongue, and Sanskrit. So first the reply will be given in English and then in Sanskrit. And Nivedita continues, the great gathering was startled on this occasion to hear the reply. And this is the reply Swamiji gave. Because I was born for this, and it was left for me to do. Why is it that no other great teachers didn't say that there are three stages, dualism, qualified monism, and non-dualism are stages? Because it was left for me to do. So we see that Swamiji's message was one of strength and fearlessness. He believed that absorbing the high ideals of Upanishad would make people strong and fearless, because they speak about the immortal Atman. To quote Swamiji, the Upanishads are the great mine of strength. Therein lies strength enough to invigorate the whole world. The whole world can be vivified, made strong, energized through them. They will call with trumpet voice upon the weak, the miserable, and the downtrodden of all races, of all creeds, and of all sects, to stand on their feet and be free. Freedom, physical freedom, mental freedom, and spiritual freedom are the watchword of the Upanishads. Swami Vivekananda's exposition of Vedanta cosmology and his sharp logic roused the interest of the scientists in the West when he was there. To the Western mind, religion and science are opposite poles. They cannot go together. And in the West, we see the early days, Christianity was trying to put down any scientific inquiry. And later, when science took the upper hand, the religion was pushed aside. But there is no difficulty with Vedanta. We see that scientific minds absorbing the Vedantic ideas. One example is Nikola Tesla. Swami Vivekananda wrote to his English devotee, Sturdy, in 1896. Mr. Tesla was charmed to hear about the Vedantic prana and akasha and the kalpas, which according to him are the only theories modern science can entertain. Tesla used to attend Swamiji's lectures. And on his return to India, in one of his lectures in Madras, he says, a person, not mentioning his name, but he says, didn't have time even to get out of his laboratory, so busy with his experiments, but he will stand for hours listening to my lecture. And they had discussion also. Swamiji continues in his letter. Mr. Tesla thinks he can demonstrate mathematically that force and matter are reducible to potential energy. I am to go and see him next week to get this new mathematical demonstration. In that case, Vedantic cosmology will be placed on the surest foundation. But Swamiji could not go then at that time, and Tesla could not provide the mathematical demonstration. That truth of the unity of force and matter was substantiated 10 years later by Albert Einstein when he came up with the equation E is equals mc squared. Swamiji also influenced some of the pioneers of American thoughts like William James, a professor at Harvard University. About Swami Vivekananda's lecture before the Philosophical Club in Cambridge on the theme, the Vedanta philosophy, Professor John Wright, the Dean of the Harvard Graduate School, wrote, Swami has evidently swept Professor James off his feet. Professor James is going to Boston to hear his talks at every opportunity. And what is the secret of such deep impact? Because Swamiji was giving the sublime teachings of Vedanta. In this same lecture on Vedanta philosophy, he says, behind everything, the same divinity is existing. And out of this comes the basis of morality. Do not injure another. Love everyone as your own self, because the whole universe is one. In injuring another, I am injuring myself. In loving another, I am loving myself. From this also springs the principle of Advaita morality, which has been summed up in one word, self-abnegation. Thank you.
Thank you again, everybody, for joining us for this Zoom session, so to say. We will be uploading this later to the Vedanta Society of New South Wales YouTube channel. Also, you may not know that recently we uploaded a very important video to our YouTube channel. That was the interview between Ray Martin and Swami Vivekananda back in 1986. A very nice interview. We got a very good quality copy from Channel 9. And so if you haven't seen that already, please have a look. That's up there. It goes for about 12 minutes. Happily, Vedanta Hall is going to reopen this week. We know we're not going to have many people coming in person, but we will have the yoga class on Thursday. It recommences, first yoga class of the year, from 10 to 11:15 a.m. on Thursday. Friday night, we have the first Friday night discussion for the year, Bhagavad Gita. You can either come in person by 7 and join us for the silent meditation. And then from 7:30, we'll start the Zoom session. Discussions led by Pravrajika Gayatriprana. Next Sunday, Gayatriprana will be giving a talk on intriguing topic, spiritual warfare, part 1. So that'll be from 11 a.m. to 12 noon, concludes with a guided meditation. We open the hall from 10:30 a.m., so you're welcome to come in early and sit in quiet meditation. And of course, with the Vedanta Hall, if you're attending in person, we request you wear a mask We believe whoever's coming these days is vaccinated well enough. Also, next Sunday, Gayatriprana will be conducting the monthly class via Microsoft Teams on Bhagavad Gita from 8 to 9 p.m. If you need to check about all these things, you can visit our website, www.sharadavedanta.org. And I think many of you are on our weekly MailChimp circular. So we'll keep reminding you and providing links for all these events. Finally, as you know, Pravrajika Gayatriprana, who started our centre here in Sydney, there's a wonderful book that's come out with the reminiscences of many monastics and devotees in Australia and India. 500 pages of reminiscences, in fact, many different anecdotes and perspectives. So that book's available. We can send it to you, or you can get it from Vedanta Hall, just to inquire. Okay, so thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you at all our events coming up.